while I'm trying to do all of this. The thing is that in the past 2 weeks, there has been about 5 killings in Russia.
Okay.
Men kill murder women,
Hmm.
and well, their husbands or ex-husbands, and mostly it's by an axe. I don't know why an axe. So they cut their limbs, something that. So that's why we decided to talk about it and
Sure.
see the experience of other countries, how to deal with it, because in Russia the law is horrible. The police says, well, if he's gonna kill you, then you can, you know, come up to us.
Okay.
So, yeah. So we can start?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, great. So, if a family member in US calls and claims that violence has been used against them, what is the response of the police?
In America, we have to remember that we don't have federal police dealing with these issues, so it is down to the local jurisdictions. And some local jurisdictions will do different things. But a typical procedure would be that the police would immediately go with at least one other backup officer. This is a high priority call, domestic violence is. And it's one of the most dangerous calls for police officers to take. So they definitely will jump right away. You'll have lots of backups going to a domestic violence call. And when they go, they try to separate the parties, conduct an investigation, and more so determine who was the aggressor. Now in Baltimore, you must separate the parties. Somebody has to leave. Usually in America, that gets shoved down to the guy. The guy will have to leave the house. And here you'll hear that argument that that's unfair, which I think they
Yeah.
have some credence to that
Well,
argument.
there,
So,
yeah.
right. So you never know what's happening in these situations, and it's very difficult for the police to come in and kind of ascertain what is really going on. Because I mean, who are your witnesses? Your witnesses are other family members, combating family members, and like children. So you really don't want to be involved in painting them against one another. So if there's any signs of physical injury, that's an automatic arrest. Somebody is going to jail whenever there is an injury, and then that person is sent to prison for an assault. And this is, you need less evidence in a domestic
Hmm.
violence than with any other assault. So a police officer would either need to see the assault take place when it's a minor assault, or he would have to have like videotape evidence, something like that, that is very convincing. But in a domestic violence, we actually lower that standard to just an injury occurring, and then you make the arrest and separate them. And a lot of things get handled in a special domestic violence court that the parties go to later on. The police kind of withdraw themselves from the situation and hand it off after that initial appearance and arrest. Now, I definitely had areas where there was the same couples constantly calling us. Like, I mean, I knew to expect them. It was like, you may as well just go there at 8 o'clock on a Friday every night because you knew this was going to happen.
Yeah, got it. So, what kind of law and regulations govern the police about this situation?
Right. So this is local law enforcement issue. So whatever your smallest, most local area is, some place will have like the state, and then there is no lower form. But then if there's a city or a town or a county that has decided to have their own police department, whatever is the lowest form of the police agency will handle the domestic violence regulations for whatever they may be. Now, your standard assaults and obvious acts of violence are going to be something that they must cover, but there's going to be a lot of nuances involved in what the procedures are that are kind of unique to each area and how they want to handle them.
Hmm. Um, what does the police do when they arrive? What is the threat to the abuser?
Right, so this is a domestic violence call is the most dangerous call that a police officer goes for. Statistically, the same violence that is taking place in the house is often directed from both parties to the police, because the police are somebody that's kind of interceding on what may be a personal issue or some kind of territorial issue that either side sees it by. So the police are almost always coming in as the enemy of some sorts. Even when the man is in a very controlling position, when you come and take that man away, you're often taking away food and other resources like that. So there is a matter of survivability that even the victim needs to consider long term that we may disagree with, but is going to be a reality. So one thing that's almost always sure for police in general is that everyone is lying. And in a domestic violence situation, I imagine that is much worse. Everyone involved is lying to us. And it's almost impossible for us to really sort out what happened there. Procedurally, you show up, you separate the parties, and you try to investigate them individually. But how much of the truth does that really get into? I would question how much truth we actually get.
Hmm. So, what is actually considered violence in this
So
kind of
I think
situation?
if you're going to say what is considered violence, you are getting into a much deeper conversation than just domestic violence. Um, the things that cause violence, a lot of people don't talk about it, but the number one correlation to violence is environmental poisoning. Something actually happens. So I think that there are two very key distinctions in what violence is, but the law doesn't really reflect it. Violence, as far as the law is concerned, is just any act that can reasonably injure somebody else. But there are clearly two different types of violence, I would argue. And the first type of violence is, I say, is a biological malfunction. And that's when somebody is in a temporary state of insanity. It can be a long-term state of insanity, like being poisoned. So lead poisoning is the number one correlate to violence. That's actually somebody that's been poisoned over the long term of their life and doesn't have the same impulse control as everyone else does because of this poisoning that took place when they were children. So that violence isn't rational. And you'll hear people say things like, I can't believe this happened. This was so unlike this person. And I would say that is violence, when it's this uncontrolled, irrational thing. And the other side is aggression. So, for instance, and like war is often aggression. If you're attacked by another country, you fighting back. I mean, that's not violence. That's survivability. So, how that translates into with a domestic violence case is often one party is violent and the other party is an aggressor, and or is going through aggression, a self-defense aggression, a survivability aggression. It's a logical choice that they have to do this act. So how, from an outside perspective, can you determine which one is subject to violence and which one is being just aggressive? From the outside, that's indistinguishable. That's very difficult with police in general. If police kill somebody, how do you distinguish that between violence and aggression? This is a very complicated issue that I think extends far beyond domestic violence into our societal understanding.
No, but I mean in a way that, for example, if your husband breaks your arm, uh, nobody even takes him away from the house back here. So does that consider being, is it violence or,
Pretty
I mean,
much, and
well, most of
here
the
it's going to
time
be
he's drunk, and he breaks your arm or hits
right.
you in the head and you're just like lying there in blood. And they're like, yeah, it's okay. You're just, you had a little argument, whatever.
Well, that is clearly violence. Whether
Well,
um, so I think the person doing the actual assault, the initiator, that is often where your violence is going to be, but that's not always clear. Sometimes a person can strike first as a rational
yeah,
response for when they know violence is coming. So
yeah,
the only way we judge it here is by who is injured. And
yeah.
obviously, that's very complicated too, because you're getting into another issue of what is physical damage. Is emotional abuse physical damage? Well, we kind of say that there's this mind and body separation. Everybody kind of feels that way, but that's just simply not
Mhm. Of
true. There is no mind and body separation, it's all
course
the
not.
same thing. So when you are emotionally abused, you will actually have physical damage that's measurable in your brain and in your stress levels. So there is, I think the police, especially here, will be very aggressive when it comes to dealing with visible violence and the injuries from visible violence. The
Mhm.
police respond to that and take that very seriously in America, and will make arrests and will try to convict people. It's usually the parties themselves that thwart the police actually taking action. So I think we have a reverse paradigm here where the police are actually probably trying to go too far in
Yeah.
dealing with domestic violence in America and could curtail it back, whereas in Russia they're clearly not going far
No, they're
enough.
not.
So these are very
At all.
complicated issues. And how do you address the emotional abuse? How the police can never see that. A lot of times policing issues come down to communal issues. There is a certain aspect where police just aren't the people you even necessarily want involved in these things because we are
Exactly.
just violence. Sometimes, or actually, I would say technically, we are aggression, but we commonly say it with violence. We are the state's wing of force. You know, whatever it's a country or a town or whatever, we are the thing that comes in and says, you must listen to us, you must comply or you will die. And
Yeah.
especially in a very complex domestic violence situation, is the comply or die order really what is the best remedy? We often have to think about whether policing is the best remedy for what we're talking about.
Got it. Thank you. And so in the United States, there is a practice of prohibiting approach. If there is it a popular measure? How's its execution monitored? I mean,
I have no idea what prohibiting approach means.
neither because my author wrote that question, so we're gonna skip it.
Okay.
I'm just a producer, I had to find you and ask you questions, you know what I mean? So, um, uh, that's really typical for Russia, I think, for most of the countries, and
Translation.
especially with women. If often it often happens that the victim, obviously it's a woman, 99%, well in Russia, basically in Europe, changes their mind and changes their testimony, protecting the abuser. In this case, the law enforcement system is powerless. They cannot do anything, right?
Kind of the law enforcement process is powerless, but not necessarily. So, the first time a spouse is being charged with a crime such as assault, if the police see it and you see the damage, the police can charge that person regardless of whether the victim wants that person charged or not. Furthermore, when you go in front of the judge and those cases are brought up, the police are the witness that comes through in the case. So you don't need their thing, but there's also this precedent that if you're married, you can have spousal privilege, which means you can't
Oh.
so if I'm convicted if I'm being charged with bank robbery, my wife
Mm-hmm.
can't actually be forced to be
Mm.
compelled to testify against me for whatever she needs. She
Yeah.
can invoke spousal privilege. But you can only do spousal privilege once. So if the person keeps getting charged for the same offense, then you can actually compel a witness to do it. I think you're treading on really weird water when you're compelling any witness to give any statement. It's kind of like relying on a snitch.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is that really the testimony we want to rely on? It's not very strong. So generally, the spouses can do a lot, but where there's physical injury, there's not much the spouse can actually do in the long run. And
Mm.
they'll fight very actively to do something about it in many cases.
I see.
But if you've been injured and a cop has good evidence of that, the legal process here is going to continue forward, which
Oh.
obviously is going to help some people. We can't discount. Is it 5 lives? Is it 10 lives? How relevant is it if it's just a couple? Where do you draw that balance? That's not my game to draw that.
Okay, got it. So, how often the families still come to serious beating and even murders? I mean, the statistics for the past, couple of years maybe, or 10 years, I don't know. Is it raising or?
Yeah, I don't. Sadly,
Well,
there's never been any change in the rates that I've
mm,
seen for domestic violence, regardless of policy that the police actually do. So, say it is those 5 people. Would 5 people actually register in our statistics? They probably wouldn't. It's not a big enough change that you would notice. From all of my time in actual policing to post policing after retirement doing research, I've never seen anything that actually bucks the trends in the amount of abuse that takes place, but in the severity of abuse, there seems to be a lot of progress where you're not going to get killings, but when the police respond very quickly, and knowing the police are going to respond very quickly, does very much appear to have an influence on the severity of injuries. So the ability to stop the situation that's ongoing, and that's kind of police as a whole. Policing all around the world, even when it's done at its best, kind of just keeps a lid on things. It doesn't actually improve things much.
Yeah.
So I would say that the rapid response of police officers is certainly going to influence lives being saved, but overall victimization probably isn't going to have that much of an influence.
Well, at least lives are saved.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, when in the U.S. There was seriously concerned about the issues of domestic violence. Were there any high-profile cases or the precedents? Well, when I lived in U.S., I'm thinking, is it after O.J. Simpson's case or was it before?
Yeah, the big push for domestic violence is definitely post O.J. Simpson's case
Yeah.
with his suspected killing of
Yes,
Nicole
that's
Brown.
the funniest thing still. I mean, still, seriously. They found blood.
So
I mean, come on.
right. So the O.J. Simpson case was a big pivotal moment for a lot of things in law enforcement and culturally in America. And
Mm-hmm.
one of those things was definitely our attention provided to domestic violence, regardless of O.J.'s conviction or whether he not did not
Oh,
whether he actually killed Nicole Brown. The history that the public was displayed upon about their past and how many times things did occur, it was clear that somebody somewhere should have intervened much earlier than the point where this thing all ended, and it seemed like that message reached a lot of agencies, and to the point where domestic violence became a very serious issue.
yeah. So it basically started from that point. Well,
Yes, totally.
yeah. So thank you so much. And how should I title you? I mean, Dr. Michael Wood or
Yep, that's
ex-police?
fine.
I mean,
Yeah,
were you an
just
officer or were you?
I was a sergeant,
Oh, it was a sergeant. Okay.
and I was in the Marine Corps. I was a sergeant in the Marine Corps and then in the police department, and then did all my postdoctoral work. So it's just Dr. Michael Wood. You could say former Baltimore police or something like that. That's fine.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much.
No
Thank you for
problem,
your
Laura. Be
time.
safe.
Bye bye, you too.
See ya.